Zach Lancaster was the type of student everyone at Westbridge Academy knew, but for all the wrong reasons. At just 16, he had lived a life of extreme privilege, thanks to his father, Victor Lancaster, a billionaire property tycoon. Zach flaunted his wealth in every possible way, driving the latest luxury cars, wearing only designer brands, and hosting extravagant parties that few were lucky enough to attend. At school, Zach wasn't known for his kindness. He treated people as if they were beneath him, convinced that money made him untouchable. Ethan Reynolds, on the other hand, was the exact opposite, a determined and brilliant student. Ethan had earned his place at Westbridge through a prestigious scholarship. He came from a hard-working family that believed in values, not wealth. But despite his academic excellence, Ethan was constantly looked down upon by students like Zach, who saw him as an outsider in their elite private school. The event that led Zach to the courtroom began one afternoon in the school cafeteria. With his usual smug expression, Zach strolled up to Ethan and tossed a bundle of cash onto the table. "I'll give you 10 grand if you carry my books. Open doors for me and do as you're told," Zach announced loudly. Basically be my personal assistant." The cafeteria went silent. All eyes were on Ethan. Ethan didn't hesitate. He calmly pushed the money back toward Zach and said, "I don't need your handouts, and I'm definitely not for sale." Zach's confident smirk twisted into a scowl. "You'll regret that," he muttered before storming away. That afternoon, Zach took his anger to the next level. In the hallway, he shoved Ethan hard into a locker, throwing insults at him in front of the entire student body. But Zach wasn't done. That night, he stole an expensive watch from a teacher's office and planted it in Ethan's locker. The next morning, he alerted the school administration, falsely accusing Ethan of theft. Ethan was humiliated, suspended, and labeled a criminal. However, what Zach hadn't accounted for was the school's security cameras. When footage exposed the truth, Westbridge Academy had no choice but to report the incident to the authorities. Zach was arrested, facing charges of assault and filing a false report. The courtroom was filled to capacity as Zach Lancaster entered with his father, Victor, a man whose mere presence carried an air of intimidation. Zach strutted in, dressed in an expensive tailored suit, looking as if he was about to laugh at the whole situation. He leaned back casually in his chair, showing no hint of concern. Judge Malcolm Harrington, a tall man with a no-nonsense demeanor, took his seat. The room fell silent as he began. "Mr. Lancaster, you stand accused of assault and fabricating evidence against a fellow student. These are serious offenses," the judge stated firmly. Zach stifled a laugh and muttered just loud enough for the courtroom to hear, "What a joke. This is a waste of time. I've got money, none of this actually matters." Judge Harrington's gaze sharpened. "Mr. Lancaster, let me make something clear. This courtroom does not care about your wealth. We care about justice." Zach rolled his eyes and muttered under his breath, "Typical. Bet this judge only got the job to make things fair for people like Ethan." Gasps echoed through the room. But Zach wasn't finished. He casually propped his feet up on the table, treating the courtroom as if it were his personal lounge. Judge Harrington's expression remained impassive, but his voice was steel. "Mr. Lancaster, you are not in a position to act this way. If you think your money makes you immune to consequences, you are gravely mistaken." Zach smirked and glanced at his father, expecting some sort of intervention. Victor Lancaster remained silent, his expression unreadable. "Let's just get this over with," Zach said nonchalantly. "I've got better things to do." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Even Victor seemed slightly uneasy at his son's arrogance. Judge Harrington's voice cut through the noise. "Mr. Lancaster, I strongly advise you to take this matter seriously. Your actions have consequences." Zach twirled a pen between his fingers, exuding arrogance. "Oh wow, another lecture. Do all judges love the sound of their own voice?" The tension in the room thickened. Judge Harrington remained calm, but unwavering. "This is not a game, Mr. Lancaster. You fabricated evidence, caused harm to an innocent student, and have demonstrated complete disregard for this court." Zach let out a slow clap, dripping with mockery. "Bravo, Judge. Really moving speech." Then, under his breath, but loud enough for all to hear. He muttered, "But he only got this job because of some diversity quota." A heavy silence filled the courtroom. Judge Harrington's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. "This is your final warning," he said, his patience nearly gone. "You are testing the limits of this court." Zach leaned toward his lawyer and whispered, "What's he going to do? Ground me?" Before the lawyer could intervene, Judge Harrington's gavel came down hard. "Enough," he thundered. "You have insulted this court and disrespected the justice system itself. I have heard enough." Zach's smirk faltered. "Zachary Lancaster," the judge declared, "this court sentences you to 2 years in a juvenile detention facility with no possibility of early release." A shocked silence spread through the room. Zach shot to his feet, his face draining of color. 2 years? You can't do that. My dad will fix this." Judge Harrington leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "You are not above the law, Zachary. It's time you learned that." As the bailiffs approached, Zach panicked. "Dad, do something." Victor Lancaster exhaled slowly. For the first time, his voice was quiet. "Zachary, there's nothing I can do." Zach's confidence crumbled. Tears welled in his eyes as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. "I'm sorry. Please. I didn't mean it." But it was too late. The courtroom watched as Zach Lancaster, once untouchable, was led away. Later that evening, Victor Lancaster visited his son in holding. Zach sat on the cold bench, his designer's suit rumpled, his face streaked with tears. "Dad, please get me out of here," he whispered. Victor looked at his son, his expression unreadable. Then, with a sigh, he said, "This time, you're on your own." At the juvenile detention center, Zach's wealth meant nothing. His expensive clothes were replaced with a standard uniform, his privileges stripped away. The other detainees didn't care who he was. For the first time in his life, he had to face reality without his father's influence. Meanwhile, Westbridge Academy publicly apologized to Ethan Reynolds, admitting their failure in protecting him. They reinstated his scholarship and honored him for his resilience. Ethan, always focused on his future, accepted with grace, knowing that justice had been served. Judge Harrington sat in his chambers that night, reflecting on the case. He knew Zach Lancaster's sentence would send a strong message, not just to him, but to everyone who thought wealth could buy their way out of consequences. The news spread rapidly. The public applauded the verdict, calling it a rare moment where privilege did not win. And for Zach Lancaster, it was the harshest lesson of all. Money couldn't buy everything. As the prison doors shut behind him, Zach Lancaster finally grasped the truth he had long ignored. His wealth held no power here. Stripped of privilege, he faced a world where entitlement meant nothing and actions had real consequences. Meanwhile, Ethan Reynolds walked into Westbridge Academy with his head held high, a symbol of resilience and justice. Judge Harrington, reflecting on the case, knew this verdict was more than a punishment. It was a statement. No one, no matter how rich, was above the law. And as the world watched, a lesson echoed loud and clear. Accountability cannot be bought.